Yo, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, happy Thursday on this wonderful day of May on LinkedIn, doing a little casual live conversation and talking about, what is on everyone's minds, which is this whole world of AI. If you're not completely sick of it, I'm sorry, but this is the world we're living in now, especially if you are an SEO, if you are a marketer, if you are an executive trying to plan the next 2, 3, 5 years of your business. It's a conversation that needs to happen. And so today I am joined by my colleagues. My name is Garrett Sussman. I'm demand generation manager here at iPullRank. We were talking AI, content strategy, and governance. I am joined by Kyle Marino. Kyle, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kyle Marino. I'm one of iPullRank's senior content strategists. I bring to the table a little over 10 years of content strategy experience with focuses in SEO, content development, all that kind of good stuff, marketing. I will not mention where I'm based out of, just not to give Mike an opportunity
And Kyle's great to have on here because he is kind of very much in the weeds of the workflows and doing this stuff. Like, this isn't what we're about to talk about today, isn't all theoretical. Like, this is us over the last few months, like everybody, but like really getting in there and figuring this stuff out and finding out what works, what doesn't, and optimizing the playbook. And speaking of the playbook, that should be your nickname, Mike. Mike, does anyone know who you are? Who are you, sir?
Mike King. I work for the people that are on the screen.
There you go. We're all iPullRank. So Mike, the playbook king. I always like give you ridiculous monikers. So you wrote this blog post the other day, and it's kind of what we're going to talk through, which is this whole idea of the generative AI still requires a content strategy. For those of you who are living under a rock, last week, Google I/O, big presentation on the search generative experience. Basically, finally, Google is going to start integrating AI into search. We're not talking about that today as much as we are talking about the tools of generating content. Using AI and why that's exciting and problematic. So first off, I guess the question to you guys I want to ask is like, why do we need a content strategy for generative AI in the first place? Like, what's different? What changes?
Well, that's the thing. It's not different. It's not different from any of the other content that would be created across an organization. And even without generative AI, we had the same problem where everyone was kind of just doing their own thing in their own like part of the organization. And typically the problem with content is that everyone owns content, so no one owns content, and everything is just a mess, right? And so generative AI tools just really like accelerate that, because anyone can create infinite amounts of content now. And if they're not aligned with the strategy, you're just gonna have a much bigger mess than you had before.
Kyle?
Well, the last thing you want is like for your organization to go rogue and just start using resources and tools without there being some sort of agreed upon kind of direction and overall goal that you want to accomplish. Just because we have that power doesn't mean that you necessarily need to use it all the time for whatever. It should always have a purpose.
And to that point, I mean, so we've been working with Market Muse and John Doherty of Editor Ninja, putting together this state of generative AI report that we will actually be releasing on Monday, polling the industry, different executives, like what they think, are they integrating into their strategy? And to your guys' point, one thing that came away from that is like, how are brands implementing generative AI tools? And the truth is, like, from the results, 50% said they're using it as an individual. Only 30% are using it like at the team level. And then 12% are using it at the organizational level. Like, only 12% of these responses are actually having this kind of unified strategy. And what does that mean to you guys? Like, that, I think it feels problematic to me.
I think those respondents that said it wasn't on the individual level are liars because I have not seen any organization aside from like, a Bankrate or some of your Red Ventures and BuzzFeed and all that other stuff that have really like come around it and said, we're going to do this as a business. And the reality is just like, everyone is just kind of, again, doing their own thing. And it's going to be far more powerful when people stop doing their own thing and all just come around the same strategy. But right now, I'm just not really seeing that from brands, at least not the ones we're working with or the ones that like we're doing, competitive analysis on. It doesn't look like people have a clear strategy of how to use this stuff.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And on top of it, it's still, because it's still kind of a new concept, I feel like a lot of companies are seeing it almost as like a taboo kind of topic to talk about, where they don't want to really show their cards unless, or they go in the complete opposite and they're just like, no, we're all into it. But I think that it's going to come down to a balance. And I think those that aren't as receptive to it are going to kind of suffer the consequences in the long run more than those that are trying to adapt to it and see where it fits.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's like Kyle, you and I have written about this, about like the risk to your reputation of doing it wrong. And we keep mentioning Bankrate. Men's Health had an issue, and BuzzFeed, and where they're doing this generative AI content, and we know there are limitations of factuality. And so like QA is a big part of that. Like you can't write Your Money, Your Life AI generated content and get it wrong. Like that's problematic. And then even just earlier today, an investors report of BuzzFeed is like, they're going all in on AI content. And so if your organization is going to having no policy is problematic because individuals could go rogue and that leads to these issues. You need a bigger strategy that addresses the generative AI component. So Mike, what does the strategy need to cover? Obviously, it's the same old, but it's new. What's old is new, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the same general approach that the content strategy discipline takes is what is required here. Like, what is the core strategy for content that we're creating? What are the workflows that we need to build out? What's the structure of the content that we're creating? What sort of like content models need to be adhered to? What are the governance models? How are you going to be maintaining this stuff? All the same basic stuff that you should be doing for your content in general. It's really how do we plug these generative AI tools into that? It's not so much like, how do we come up with a brand new strategy as a result of these things? It's really how do you augment an existing strategy? But the problem is most companies still don't have a defined content strategy to begin with.
Do you think like if you're even going to consider doing the generative AI thing, you kind of have to revisit your content strategy to begin with? You've got to look at your brand voice. You've got to look at your internal policies. You got to look at your workflows. Where do you start with all of that?
Yeah. So, the way that we're approaching this with clients is before we're like, hey, here's the tool to use, we're like, what are you doing? Like, how does content already work here, right? And, reviewing whatever documentation that they have and reviewing the tool sets that they have, and then saying, okay, well, you've got a brand voice and tone that is doing pretty well for you, but also we've reviewed your existing content. You're not being consistent with that brand voice and tone. So as part of what we're doing here and using a tool like, let's say AIPRM as an example, let's make sure that we build out that voice as part of all these prompts that you're using. So it's really like, okay, what do you have and what adjustments need to be baked into this generative AI process so that you guys aren't going off the rails and it's really built into the toolkit that you're using. And also it's looking at, okay, like which CMS are you using, or what like content planning tools are you using? Do they already have native integrations with OpenAI? Do they need to be built in using like Zapier or something like that? Or do we need to build something custom to make it work with all that? All of these things need to be considered as you go through this process. And then what are the stages that content goes through in your organization? What tools are used for all of this? Who's reviewing things? Like, we need to know all that information coming into it. So if it's not already documented, we can document it for you. And we can figure out where the gaps are and then plug into that. So it's not like coming in from scratch and being like, here's what a content strategy is, unless it needs to be that. But more often than not, it doesn't need to be that. It's really that every different group in an organization is managing content differently. And so we've got to bring everyone to the table and say, here's the consistent way we're going to do content moving forward.
And to that point, it's like, that's why you can't read an article and just assume that you're getting something prescriptive that works for everyone, because we know, especially working at enterprise, like with enterprises, that every company structure is different. Like, at one place there might be a centralized content team that's in charge of all content, and another one it might be communications. How do you kind of suss out, being a Sussman that I am, but how do you suss out the person who should be in charge of all the governance for these policies, these workflows, like implementing the AI? Like, how, if you're in an organization listening to this podcast, like this conversation, where do you figure that out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's a consistent role, because not every team has a content strategist. Not every organization has like a chief content officer or something like that. It could be a project manager that's doing this stuff. It could be, a writer who's taking it upon themselves to be like, hey, there needs to be some consistency here. Or it could be like a VP of marketing or whatever. But the bottom line is, you've got to figure out who is most engaged in content at the highest level, and then, speak to that person and use that as your place to start. But more often than not, you've got to enroll more people across the organization in order for this to happen, right? Like, you've got to figure out, okay, in a lot of cases, you've got these matrix organizations where you got like, one line of business here and one line of business here, and they might have like, a center of excellence or some sort of like centralized group. That centralized group is probably your best bet for pushing something out to all of the teams, because they already know like the nuances between the teams, who reacts well to what, and who's going to be the person that's going to get on board with things. If you don't have any sort of like centralization, best of luck. But, basically you've got to create that. You've got to bring people, key stakeholders from each part of the organization, and be like, yo, content isn't working. Is it working for you? No. Is it working for you? No. Cool. Let's get together and come up with a plan that makes it work for all of us.
And then the next part of that is ultimately executing. So like, Kyle, you're like doing the thing, if you will. What do you need to be able, like, what sort of policies, what sort of assets, what sort of like documents do you need to be able to put this sort of strategy together?
I mean, the best way to do it is really understanding, going off of what Mike says, is how the workflow or the process is internally. If it's just a content strategist publishing blogs onto the web, then that's fine. Like, there probably isn't too many steps, too many review stages or anything like that. But for some bigger brands, there could be a legal department that gets involved, or a compliance department. And so really understanding how many sets of eyes are reviewing these pieces of content before they go out can then kind of give us the opportunity to say, all right, well, if legal is looking for A, B, and C, we can kind of bake that into the generative AI platform, have them already look for that, to reduce the amount of time that it would take an actual person to then kind of run through and review it. So it would automatically get sent back to the writer before it even goes to another person. So really understanding that process will help make generative AI not just like this novel, shiny new kind of product, but something that's really valuable overall in the end.
Yeah, I think like getting those stakeholders sounds like the important conversation to start. And like, to your point, both of you, Kyle and Mike, it's like anyone in the organization can start the conversation, can start bringing people together and make that happen. Once we start executing for this kind of content strategy, do you look at it as a living organic document? Like, does it need to be able to be fluid, or is it something that you do this once and you're good to go, for the foreseeable future?
I don't think it's a do it once and you're good to go. I like, it's not a set it and forget it for sure. Because AI is still so new that it's going to be changing and evolving and adapting in different ways. Probably new features being rolled out, new opportunities to kind of integrate it into more of the workflow. So with all that, I think that it does need to be kind of a living, breathing, ever-changing kind of doc to just kind of make sure you're maintaining and following.
Yeah. So what types of workflows are you putting into place? So we started to talk about this, but like in terms of execution, someone might be creating blogs, but there's a whole range of different content. What are some of these workflows?
When you say workflows, like, you mean like the different types of content and everything that we could be producing with AI, or more of like how AI can kind of influence the workflow for different types of content?
That's a good call. I think it's a little bit of both. I think let's start with the idea of the processes that you're putting into place that are specifically need to be fleshed out for a generative AI product.
Okay. So I would say like everything, I would say almost every part of it could benefit from generative AI, from all the way from ideation to the actual full production or drafting. But I think it's also going to be much more valuable when people aren't, using just Chat GPT for content creation, and they have their own personal Chat GPT to kind of use for their brand, and they're able to train it with their own information. I think looking like even down to competitive analysis, being able to analyze some of your competitor websites to see where their content gaps are, so you can kind of perform an information gain aspect to your own work. That'll show more value than just asking ChatGPT to write you like a blog post about coffee.
Mike, what do you think of the process, the entire process?
Yeah, I think that there are numerous places that it can be plugged in. So as early as like market research and briefing and things like keyword research and all those sorts of things. And so I think you need like these kind of small workflows for each of those things. And it really comes down to like how do you do these things as it stands, right? Like everyone has a different approach to keyword research. Everyone has a different approach to market research and market segmentation and things like that. And so depending on how your process is defined, you should have a series of prompts that relate to that. And then also, as an example, if we're doing keyword research with Chat GPT, it's not going to give you, search volumes, like not real search volumes. And so maybe your process is something to the effect of like, hey, let's have a prompt that's like, give me a list of keywords about X, but return them in JSON. So then it can be passed off to a tool, and then it can pull the search volumes from SEMrush or SEMrush or something like that. So really it comes down to what are you trying to do and how do you usually do it? And then what is it that your generative AI tool can do to speed it up or improve it or whatever. And so, I think it's really like looking at your existing process for content, like the whole way through, and thinking about ways or places that you can improve it. So, like content auditing, it is a valuable thing that we can do now where it's like, hey, take this piece of content and tell me what stage in the user journey it fits in. Or take this piece of content and here is a whole big description of the brand voice and tone considerations. Does it match this? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it? So there's any number of time consuming manual things that can be replaced or reconfigured around this new technology. And so that's why I'm saying you've got to take a look at existing workflows and then figure out where you can plug something in to improve it.
It's funny because I think about some of these large organizations where you have a marketing ops, you have your content creators, you have your QA editors. Each of them could use generative AI or AI tools in their process, but they all are used to their own workflows. And so there's like definitely an education component, I feel like, where everyone needs to be educated and, to your point, on the same board. It's like, do you have a centralized person who's educating everyone, or does each department need to learn, like how to use these things to those individual pieces in the greater scheme? It's a very complicated thing when you break it down, the bigger the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think processes in general are complicated for large organizations, right? Like a process is really just a list of steps, and in some cases, like diagrams and things like that. But when you're talking about getting thousands of people or hundreds of people on board to do the same thing, it can be very difficult, obviously. So I think that there's just so much value in taking a look at this stuff and saying, okay, well, how do we use this in a fail-safe way, like where no one can mess it up? And again, that's why I think you need to be figuring out, how do we work this into existing tools rather than requiring people to learn a whole bunch of new tools that is going to create a whole lot of confusion, and there's just going to be a learning curve for anything that you look to roll out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think the reception aspect of it too, it's much easier for a team to see the opportunities to kind of improve their workflow rather than having a new thing that they have to add to their workflow, which could be not as, I guess, ideal for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things we asked in the State of Generative AI report is like, to what extent is your experience helping your workflow or a hindrance? So Kyle, I'm kind of curious, like from your experience, what you found so far in terms of what is actually helping you do your job better and what still needs work, like from the technology that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would say one of the biggest ways AI has been helpful is almost what Mike was saying with the keyword research, but kind of flipped, is if you take a list of long tail keywords and you throw it into ChatGPT or another generative AI kind of platform, you can get a lot of great different topics around those keywords, rather than trying to come up with a list of topics, which can take a while, especially with some very specific long tails. So that in that way, it's been very helpful. You can use it for copy briefing to generate a really quick outline for what you're looking to accomplish. If you are using other generative AI platforms like Midjourney, AI PRM specifically has like a really good Midjourney prompt that you could use, where you just literally give it like maybe 5 words to describe what you're looking for, and it'll create the prompts for you. And then besides that, I would say where it's limited still is don't rely on it for any sort of stats or factual pieces of information that you require sources for, because it will make up those sources for the most part. I would say 95% of the time, if you ask it for a source, that page does not exist. And not only that, but yeah, I mean, even with all of the capabilities it has, it still sounds like a robot at the end of the day when it creates a piece of content. So that piece of human interaction is still needed to really make sure that it is aligned with your voice and tone. It is aligned with your writing style, and it's not just a cold, static piece of content.
And I think to that point, it almost highlights one paradigm shift that we all need to kind of adapt to in the role of content creation, is that editing is like, content creation might go faster, but editing is going to take longer, because you can't just, go into autopilot with editing anymore and just think about it from like a proofreading standpoint. Like, everything to some extent needs to be fact checked, especially if you're not a subject matter expert yourself, or you need to make sure your subject matter experts are really reviewing it. I mean, that was the issue that Bankrate ran into, not too long ago. And so how, from your guys' perspective, how important is QA? Is that, I mean, we all want to assume that it doesn't change because you should be doing this from the get-go, but do we need to impress upon organizations how much more important QA is at this point?
Yeah, QA is
important. Yeah, I mean, I've been saying from jump, like, don't just publish stuff that you get out of these tools. Like, you've got to review it in a variety of ways. And again, I think that's where, the governance side really needs to come into play, right? You need to have a subject matter expert that's reviewing things before they go live. And I don't think that process changes much from what it should already be. And most of the organizations that we work with, there's legal review, there's brand review, there's, subject matter review, like there's all sorts of reviews, right? So that should still be a thing. It's just that there are opportunities, and I haven't really seen enough of this yet, but there are opportunities to build tools where it's like, all right, well, here's the list of facts for this space, or here's the reference material. Use that to be like the first layer of fact checking before you even turn it over to those people. Or do the same thing with brand reviews, like voice and tone stuff. So I anticipate that there's going to be like more products around that in the near future. But even so, I don't think that should like supplant the need for, having an actual human that knows what they're talking about reviewing the content.
And ultimately with the enterprises, that's our big discussion. Is there's almost this joke that everything takes extra time. SEO doesn't take 6 months. It just takes an enterprise like 6 months to actually publish content. Realistically, we're having conversations obviously with our clients, but not a lot of enterprises are going to be able to get this out the door. Do you guys think that enterprises will actually be able to adopt generative AI in their workflows, or is it going to be 5 years before they even get to that point?
I don't think it's going to be 5 years. I think it will take, a year for a lot of organizations to get on board and do it. But the thing is, those organizations are going to be so far behind with capabilities for how fast things are happening. And it's so crazy because, we've been doing generative AI stuff since 2020. And there are brands like financial services brands that I was like, they would never want something like this. And, they're coming to us. They're like, we want to do this. And I'm like, how? Like, there's no way that, there's not no way, but like, you're going to have to change a lot of things to allow for this to happen. But it's just like the reality of the world where something is kind of like the Overton window, right? Like once everyone is on board with this idea, suddenly everything is easy to do. So ChatGPT really just opened up a lot of doors for this stuff, and things that just weren't possible before are now possible. However, these large organizations, as an example, like something like AutoGPT, right? Mm-hmm. They don't even know about that. And
well, let's explain to our audience what AutoGPT is for folks who aren't familiar.
Sure. So AutoGPT is this like open source project that creates what are called agents that will do a series of tasks based on the original task that you ask it for to figure out a thing. So let's say, I'm like, hey, solve world peace for me. It'll just keep doing prompts until it figures it out. And, it's not perfect. It's still, pretty beta and buggy and whatever. But there have been people that have like developed use cases with it that are quite interesting. And so, that's just going to rapidly improve. Like, that's just the reality. And, it's not on the radar of most people. And if we were to bring something like that to a large financial services company or a large enterprise, by the time they go through approval on it, like the next thing will be out, or the next 5 things will be out. And it's like, they will always be playing catch up. So what that means is it's actually a huge opportunity for like mid-market or small companies that can be more agile and incorporate these things much faster.
Oh yeah, and it's not impossible, because I remember like a couple months ago that Bloomberg, released their whole like LLM tuned to Bloomberg's content, which there are these opportunities, especially when you are an enterprise with so much content on the internet, to use it to your advantage. But there's going to be, it's a risk reward, right? Because there's the first mover winning, but there's also the reputation potential. To your point about small businesses, though, you guys have mentioned like AI PRM. It's like you can have your own prompt library if you're developing your own like tone and voice prompts and then using it with all these existing prompts there. Like there are ways to establish yourself now and not wait.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, tools like AI PRM are fantastic, and, specifically AI PRM, in that you've got this whole like community of prompt creators that are just like making things every day, and you can just kind of search through and be like, oh, here's one I can use for whatever, right? And then you also have your own prompts that you're building, and you're saving and able to just like quickly ramp up on whatever it is you're trying to create. And I think that what people still aren't really understanding, I mean, I guess they're slowly starting to understand that prompt engineering is like, it's the thing. Like, you've got to be able to do it well in order to get the output that you want. Because most people, just because of the ease of how you can get a response, you're just like, oh yeah, make me a Christmas list or whatever you're trying to ask for. It's going to give you something, but it really requires you to be very prescriptive to get the sort of output that you want that's going to be much closer to usable. And so that's what I really love about that platform. Just how easy it allows you to get to like the actual output that you need to use.
And to that point, people do need to realize there is still an element of trial and error. Like for those folks who are just trying out like these tools for the first time, like it is hard to get like the exact right thing the very first get-go. That's why, having like working through your business's tone and voice and applying that to the prompt, and then kind of working with the AI to get to where you want to be. I love what with the AI PRM, like to help with Midjourney, because it's funny, Kyle and I have been using Midjourney for some of our own blog posts, or I'll use it on some of your presentation images, Mike, and like it's hard to get exactly what you have in mind the very first time. Like it is a skill set to learn how to use these tools, and not get frustrated and just give up on it because you don't get exactly what you imagine from the get-go. Like it is a skill set that everyone's going to need to adopt and learn.
Yeah, I mean, as an artist, like that's how I feel. Like when I try to draw something, it's like, what's in my head is not on this paper. But I mean, that's why I stopped drawing comic books. But I have a friend, his name is Johnny October. He is amazing with Midjourney and all the different tools. And, I think he quit his job and now he's just like doing that stuff. Like he's that good at it. And it really is a skill set. People have started to say like, hey, prompt engineering isn't going to be around forever because, the machines are going to get better and you're going to be able to be very like unclear in what you ask and get what you want. I don't know. I think it's just like programming any other way. You're still going to need the skill set if you want to get precisely what you want. So, I think it's really valuable to have access to prompts like that are going to get you closer to what it is that you want. So you don't have to spend hours, creating something that you probably would have taken you a single hour if you did it manually.
Seriously, Kyle, what's been your experience playing with all this stuff?
So for starters, I'm surprised that anyone is saying prompt engineering is not going to be a thing like down the road, because I think it's just going to become more and more important as time goes on. even as platforms get more advanced, they're still not going to be able to read your mind. So you're still going to have to be able to concisely convey what you're looking for. And even if you are struggling with that, the most advanced thing can only do so much guesswork. So I think that along with like the role of copywriters and content strategists, there might be a role of content engineer that is just specifically looking for opportunities and different ways to really improve the overall outputs that you're getting from these different platforms. One other way that I'll show some love to AIPRM is the fact that like with certain, like at certain tiers, you're able to actually include new writing styles, new tones. That way you don't have to always establish that in the prompts or anything. And you can literally just choose it from a dropdown and it gets you closer to that finished result. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's definitely going to not sound as much like a bot as, what ChatGPT would do on a standalone.
Yeah, especially if you're not actually a writer. If there's anyone who does have any questions, feel free to throw that in the chat. But one thing I would definitely say is if you are watching this and your organization hasn't adopted AI in any capacity, or you're doing it at an individual level, I feel like career-wise, it's an opportunity to bring that to the table, because to these guys' point, it's not going away. So it's like, if you can be the champion of these, this tech, and get it into your workflows and show the value of how you can, improve productivity, find efficiencies, save money, and also help your business be like kind of a innovator and a leader, now's the time to do it, because to Mike's point, people will catch up. And if you're the last one to do that, then ultimately someone else is going to beat you to the punch and you're going to miss an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea of like a content moat, right? Like imagine you were like, hey, I want to compete with Nerd Wallet, and you're starting from scratch. Like, you know how much content you have to make? You know what I'm saying? Like, even with generative AI, it probably take you years to catch up, right? And so everyone now has the power to do that. So if you are not embracing this technology and using it to be the force multiplier that it is, you're going to get left behind, and think about this, not just from a perspective of creation. This tool set is just so good for optimization as well. And so all these things that have been manual for so long, things that we spent like hours toiling on to get like the perfect meta description, the perfect page title, and so you can have that stuff in seconds. And if you don't like it, you can press a button and have it again in seconds. So like, why would you not use this? I don't understand. If your concern is like, oh, it doesn't sound like my brand, like there's ways around that. Or if your concern is like, hey, it's going to be inaccurate, there's ways around that. And, they're not like expensive. They're like, hey, configure it this way rather than this way. So I really don't understand why a brand wouldn't use it. And the reality of it is, even if you think your brand is not using it, someone at your brand is using it. So bring it together so you're all working on the same strategy, and then you can maximize it.
And we're not talking like no money either. Like you were saying that we've been doing since 2020. Like there was a global e-commerce marketplace that we helped generate $295 million in incremental revenue. And one part of that was using AI, like GPT-2 back in the day, in terms of adding content to category pages. Like it matters.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many case studies in the wild at this point that I mean, ours is obviously impressive, but like so many people have seen, similar results or at least big results from using it. So, and now that like Google isn't even being like, oh yeah, we hate AI content. They're like, yes, it's fine as long as it's for people. That was the only real concern before. So really, just do it.
Especially if you have a chatbot on your site, like for people who complain about like AI generated content, if you've had, which so many businesses have had the most awful like chatbot experience on their site for the past 5 years, if you're cool with that, then I don't understand why you wouldn't be okay with where we're at. That like, you've done that? You know, it's like you go to some like I remember hiring like a pest thing. You know, we had a wasp situation, but I went to their site and I was like sitting on the chat bot, you know, and this is a few years ago. And like I couldn't talk to a person. And like the technology was so bad at the time then. And like there are tons of places that do that and have it, even in the SaaS community. I do want to. So Tom Johns has a question to ask you guys: Is how do you all think this is going to look in? Impossible question, Tom, but we'll try to answer it. How do you think this is going to look in 5 years when the barrier to entry for mass scale, high quality content is basically zero, and at least for text, it's almost undetectable?
Nah, I'm real clear on what that's going to look like. I've been thinking about that, you know, since like 2019. So one thing is that Google is going to have to leverage information gain to like separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Like they were going to have to say, okay, what is the additional value of this content when considering it for ranking? But the other thing is that because there's going to be so much content, I think we're going to get to a point where people are going to like really look for points of differentiation. And what I mean by that is like you're going to have, you know, article for every specific audience on every single topic. Like historically, and even now, people kind of like aim for the middle when they're talking about a given thing. Like, let's say we're talking about, oh, I made a beginner's guide for SEO, right? Like, you're like, how can it speak to every specific audience that's looking for this keyword? They're not typically trying to say like, okay, well, this is the beginner's guide for people in SaaS, or this is a beginner's guide for people in e-commerce or something like that. So what you're going to have is every micro audience is going to have its own content. And then Google is going to get better at that level of personalization. They're going to be like, oh, well, you live in Brooklyn. You also own several companies. Here's the version of this article for you, rather than like, here's the broad article for the situation. And so personalization is just going to get even more granular to align with that.
And to that point, I would say remove the idea of keyword cannibalization from your vocabulary, because that's kind of what it speaks to. Like, even if there's like, because people are scared to death of like, oh, I'm going to have an article that's going to rank for a similar, like 2 articles that's going to rank for the same keyword. But to that point in the future, that's going to be valuable because you're not writing literally the exact same thing. They're going to be 2 different search intents. And especially as we saw from the search generative experience, you know, you're not just like, yes, there will still be people who rank for these head terms of like 2-word keywords, but like our search behavior is going to change as we get used to being able to get a more specific answer for what we're looking for. And that'll change content creation.
Yeah, I think that's going to be huge. Like, you know, head terms, aside from like navigation driven head terms, I think, you know, the other ones might kind of fall off dramatically, right? Like you're going to have queries that are going to be full sentences that aren't just looking for duplicate content. You're going to have people like merging the 3 different searches that they did before into one. And so you're going to have content experiences that speak directly to that. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
It's going to be fascinating how that plays out, though, like who gets that strategy right, because it's not easy. Like you don't want programmatic SEO where it is just like a mad libs of changing the words. It still has to be tailored content that speaks to a different persona. The way an executive and a manager and a freelancer look for the same content is going to have nuanced differences to it. And maybe there's not enough of that content out there right now, but there will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you think, Kyle? Are you as a content creator, how do you think about that when you're writing? Are you still nervous at this point in time to write to one very specific audience, or do you feel comfortable like getting in there like detailed, or are we not there yet?
I mean, I think I think getting in there with the detail is extremely important. I think the way search has evolved since the very beginning kind of shows that we're heading towards what Mike is saying with personalization, just because, you know, it's just become more and more evolved, even every quarter almost, with the updates that they roll out, how they rank things, how we have changed our search, how we're using social media platforms to search now and stuff too. It's just, I think that because we've kind of unlocked Pandora's box with the amount of content we're able to produce, it's just going to make the overall experience much better when you have a certain question or a certain need, and you'll be able to find something a lot more accurate than you can now.
Yeah. And to that point, it's like, I feel like subject matter experts in the past, as a content creator, you would depend on a subject matter expert to be able to inform your content. Going forward, it's going to be like, we're all going to have to be more just straight up journalists, where it's like, if we just get the interview from the subject matter expert, then the tools will just produce that personalized experience. Like, anyone will be able to produce content, whether or not you are a good writer or a good speaker or not in the future. So it's going to be a very interesting future. If there aren't any other questions, really, I genuinely appreciate your guys' time today. I know you all are busy. Obviously, you know, we are all in at iPullRank when it comes to AI, generative AI, content strategy. We actually have started kind of, you know, we have our service down at this point. So if your organization is actually like thinking about how can you either get that workflow, get that governance, get that content strategy in place, or get an advocate for you, because that's the biggest thing. I know, Mike, you talk to enterprises constantly, so you understand the conversations that need to happen to make a program like this happen in the first place. That's something that we offer now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty exciting, to be honest, you know, because we're like defining a category to some degree. Whereas with SEO, it's like you kind of got to fight against everyone's, like, you know, past experiences and what they know and don't know about SEO. So it's really exciting because people are just like, oh, cool. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. And, you know, it combines everything that we do, like the super technical end of solutions architecture, the content strategy work, and also everything we've learned from doing SEO really comes into play too.
Yeah, it's been a while since you really feel empowered to innovate more easily. You know, it's not just doing what everyone else is doing. It's like, you get an idea, this tech can allow you to make it happen real quick.
Yeah, it kind of makes it clear that, like, most of what we do as humans is write words. Like, in some form or another, writing words impacts everything we do. And now that we have like platforms that can do that at scale, you know, everything is anything you want to do is like, can you communicate the idea effectively enough? Because if you can, then you can do it instantly. So do
cool. So do it. Just do it. No, just do it. Just reach out to us. No. So last takeaway as we wrap up, Kyle, what's your big like parting takeaway in this conversation around AI and generative and content strategy?
I would say all of those people that came out and were like, AI is going to replace our jobs, they're thinking the wrong thing. You're going to get replaced if you don't know how to use AI to help amplify your job.
Learn it. There you go. Mike, big takeaway? Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of agreeing, or I'm definitely agreeing with what Kyle says. You know, someone told me a long time ago, and I'm sure it's like a famous quote, but it really stuck with me. When the rate of change outside of your organization is faster than the rate of change inside of your organization, that's when things are going to fail. So, you know, if you're not embracing this stuff, you're just going to get left behind. Your competitors are going to crush you. And, you know, we'll probably buy your domain for cheap. So there you go.
And my final takeaway is you just have to always be learning. You really do. All this stuff is happening too fast. There's a lot of noise out there. There's too many things to get distracted by. But at the same time, you do have to have as much an open eye as possible. You have to use critical thinking. Like there's going to be so much like fake crap out there that you're going to have to sift through, that you have to really just use your brain, and you can't just believe what anyone tells you, and enjoy it. Have fun. This is, like Mike said, this is a really fun time to be in business, to be in SEO, to be in tech, to be in marketing, to be in whatever, to be a person.
To be alive. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. Kyle, Mike, Garrett of iPullRank. We will catch you at our next LinkedIn Live next Thursday. Peace out.